Recording in progress.
Hello, good morning. Good morning all to this webinar. My name is Toyosi Odumbaku. I will be moderating today's session, which is themed Nigeria Healthcare Infrastructure Gap, Solving the Financing Conundrum. Once again, I want to thank every person already joined into the session. And I also particularly want to thank the panelists and the keynote speaker for their indulgence and for coming onto this session. And also, we look forward to an engaging session and a productive one at that. I would want to crave more indulgence for us to have the 2 or 3 minutes wait for more participants to join in and one more panelist. So in 2-3 minutes, latest by 11:05, we'll kick off accordingly. Thank you.
We have this entire misunderstanding of what Darwin really meant when he said survival of the fittest.
The whole Earth is actually one cohesive system. Everything is interrelated to each other, it's self-balancing, and we are screwing up the balance. This is going to change the world.
Okay, thank you so much for waiting. And again, I want to thank the panelists, our keynote speaker, Dr. Ajayi, for the indulgence. And so at this time, we would open the session, and I would want to invite my sector leader, Mrs. Okorocha, who is the Health and Pharmaceuticals Sector Leader in Jackson, Eti and Edu, to give us opening remarks to kick off this webinar session. Mrs. Okorocha.
Thank you so much, Toyosi. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar titled Nigeria's Healthcare Infrastructure Gap and Solving the Finance Conundrum. You know, when we decided on that topic, you know, we questioned ourselves. Can the Nigerian healthcare infrastructure gap actually be solved? The financing conundrum, can it actually be solved? And we told ourselves that yes, with dedication, commitment, the right policies in place, perhaps the right people in the right places, that perhaps we can actually get to the place where this thing that seems like such a conundrum can indeed be solved. There's one thing that has shown us the importance of healthcare in any industrialized nation, or let's say developing nation. It's the recent COVID-19 pandemic, which had governments, individuals, you know, those in the let's say charitable organizations, you know, all scrambling around and looking for how to solve the pandemic, which threatens to wipe out humanity. And if there's one place that it showed the huge gap that we have in the world today, it's the Nigerian situation. You know, it reveals to us the problems, you know, the huge infrastructural gap, you know, and even all the money and all the, you know, strategies that have been thrown at it don't actually seem to be solving the problem. And so we as a firm, Jackson Eti and Edu, thought it was important that we give this center stage. We gather together a team of knowledgeable, dedicated people in the industry, both in terms of finance and in terms of healthcare and pharmacy, you know, the whole healthcare chain, to come and actually look at the real issues. What exactly is the problem in our country regarding healthcare and the funding of SAFE? What exactly is this infrastructural gap that we're all talking about? And you might wonder, Jackson Eti Edu, we're not a hospital, we're not a pharmaceutical company, and we're not, we don't provide healthcare. But indeed, if you had any look at the entire chain of healthcare provision, you would know that lawyers, regulators, you know, all sorts of service providers are critical. Financial organizations are critical to the delivery of healthcare in Nigeria. And just to give you a little background about our firm, Jackson Eti and Edu, we are indeed a full service law firm with our headquarters in Nigeria, in Lagos, but we have a sector focus. We actually came to the realization some years ago that the way that legal services are purchased by would-be clients, or should we say prospects, is completely changed. That the clients not only need you to know the law, but they need you to know their industry as well. And we took a key decision at that time to develop our knowledge and expertise in 6 key sectors, which are our sectors of focus. And obviously the healthcare and the pharmaceutical sector is one of the sectors of interest to us, as indeed is the financial services sector. And so this webinar is being organized by a collaboration between our health and pharmaceutical sector practice group, as well as our financial services practice group. Now, I know you can see from the backdrop that we are 25 years strong this year. Yes, Jackson Etiedu is 25 years old this year, and we will be celebrating later on in the year. I'm sure most of you will get an invitation to celebrate with us. But one thing is for sure, in those 25 years, we have developed the expertise, the knowledge, both industry knowledge and indeed practice service knowledge to be able to, the health and pharma and the financial services sectors are just 2 of the sectors where we pride ourselves on our knowledge and our expertise and our ability to have gained a deep understanding of those sectors and what it takes to be able to provide robust legal services to clients' diverse needs. And so 25 years strong, 11 partners, a support staff, or a total staff strength of almost 200 people. We are happy to bring to you today this discourse on the healthcare infrastructural gap in Nigeria and looking at ways to try and solve the financing gap. I don't want to take up too much of our time. We just have a limited time to hear from this wonderful group of experts that we've gathered together. And I join my voice, even at this time, to Toyosi, to thank all the speakers and the panelists who have decided to spend their Wednesday morning with us. I know that as we draw to a close, everybody is looking for last minute things to do to get in all their goals, achieve all their goals and their targets for the year. And so we are so humbled that you have decided to spend your Wednesday morning with us. I also want to say thank you to all the attendees who have also given us their time today to listen to this critical discourse. And so thank you once again, everybody. I look forward, I'm excited. I look forward to learning. I look forward to an interactive platform today. And thank you once again to our speakers, our keynote, our panelists, and everybody in attendance. And so let the discourse begin. Back to you, Toyosi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Okorocha. I think covered all the points there. And so without much ado, I would want to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Richardson Ajayi, as well as our panelists for this session. I would start with Dr. Ajayi, who is, I'm sure, known to a good number of us here, and particularly a revered name in the healthcare industry. Dr. Ajayi is an accomplished obstetrician, gynecologist, and is an healthcare entrepreneur, business executive, and he has spent over 22 years spearheading healthcare revolution in Nigeria. Equally, is a well-known thought leader in the healthcare sector. Dr. Richardson Ajayi studied at King's College in London, where he obtained his MBBS in 1988, and subsequently he was inducted into the Royal College of obstetricians and gynecologists in 1993, and he became a fellow in 2006. Incidentally, Dr. Ajayi, I would want to say, is revered as the doyen of IVF and fertility practice in Nigeria, having established a Bridge Clinic, which is one of the top tier IVF clinics in the industry. Equally, Dr. Ajayi sits on the board of several healthcare related institutions, which includes Bridge Clinic, of course. He also sits on the board of the Health Federation of Nigeria, HFN, and he was also recently appointed as the chairman of the board of the Lagos State University Teaching Hospital, LASUT. Dr. Ajayi is equally how will I call it, a continuous investor in the healthcare industry. He has the knowledge and the necessary expertise. And I make bold to welcome Dr. Ajayi to today's webinar session. Dr. Ajayi, you are muted.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Percy.
Thank you, sir. Then equally, we have on our panelist for the panel session, we have 4 distinguished, how will I call it, personalities. And I want to start with Mrs. Temi Awugboro of Evercare Hospital. Mrs. Awugboro is the founding executive director in Evercare Hospital, which I would want to, say on the side that has caused a bit of disruption in the healthcare industry. Evercare Hospital is actually gaining ground in the healthcare sector, particularly for the infrastructure that the hospital has, revealed to the public, and also because of the beds numbers in the hospital. Mrs. Awugboro started off as a Goldman Sachs leaders scholar, and worked with Goldman Sachs for a good number of years before she proceeded to TPG Capital. And currently TPG Evercare Hospital is owned by TPG Capital. And she of course holds a management position there where the hospital successfully raised funds, to measure up in terms of infrastructure gap in the healthcare sector. And most recently, Mrs. Awugboro was appointed as a member of the Health Sector Reform Committee by President Buhari. And I'm sure she will certainly be considering how to revolutionize the healthcare sector. The committee will be considering private and public options in that regard. And on this note, I want to say welcome to Mrs. Awugboro and thank her again for coming on to this webinar session.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Thank you. Then equally on the panel, we have Dr. Abayomi Sule, who is the current managing director of CarePay Nigeria Limited. CarePay is an IT related, an IT, slash, I would say, healthcare company. It provides digital services in the healthcare sector. And one of those foremost services it provides is the InsurTech service, which ties to the healthcare sector. Dr. Abayomi is an alumnus of the University of Ilorin, where he obtained his MBBS. He equally obtained an MBA from the Lagos Business School, and he also proceeded to the Stanford University in the US, where he obtained certifications at the Stanford Institute for Innovation in Developing Economies. He has also attended the World Health Organization's basic and advanced courses on healthcare financing for universal coverage. Dr. Abayomi sits on the board of two not-for-profits, which includes Society for Healthcare Quality in Nigeria and PATH, which is based in the United States. I want to say thank you again, Dr. Abayomi Sule, for honoring our invitation and coming to this.
I'm glad to be here. Look forward to an engaging discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Then we have our very own Mr. Dolu Olubenjo, who is the Chief Infrastructure Investment Officer. Apologies. Mr. Olubenjo is the Chief Investment Officer of Stanbic IBTC Infrastructure Fund. Mr. Olubenjo has cognate experience that stretches over 10 years in the finance industry. He's an executive of the Standard Bank Group, as well as the head of corporate financial solutions at Stanbic IBTC Capital. Mr. Olubenjo had a transactional experience spans project finance, acquisition finance, which of course extends to healthcare, telecoms, industrial and oil and gas sector. Mr. Olubenjo was formerly of Ernst & Young, and so I can imagine his experience in the sector. And on this note, I will say welcome, Mr. Olubenjo. We are so happy to have you here to share your views and make contributions as
Thank
well.
you very much for having me. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for looking forward to an engaging session.
Thank you so much. Then I would also want to invite our own Mr. Kunle Shoibo, who is a partner and the head of the financial services sector of health and of Jackson 80 and Edu. Mr. Shoibo also leads the corporate mergers and acquisitions team of Jackson 80 and Edu. Mr. Shoibo he has extensive experience in debt and equity issuance transactions. He has extensive experience having managed fundraising for several healthcare institutions in Nigeria. He has advised on big ticket private equity and M&E acquisitions within the banking, oil and gas, and of course, healthcare sectors. Mr. Shoibo is a recognized international financial law review rising star and well known within the investment circles in healthcare. And on this note, Mr. Shoibo, it's good to have you here as well.
Thank you, Toyosi. I'm very great to be here. Thank you, Toyosi. I'm very great to be here.
So without wasting any time, I would want to invite Dr. Richard Ajayi to give us his keynote address, which I am certain would open up necessary discussions and conversations. Thank you, Dr. Ajayi.
Thank you very much. Let me thank Koye Edu and his team at JEE for the opportunity to give this presentation. I'm looking forward to an engaging discussion with the distinguished panel that we put together, and I hope to learn a few things. So ladies and gentlemen, my topic for discussion is Nigeria healthcare infrastructure gap, solving the financing conundrum. And as TLC has introduced me, I mean, I'm a doctor, but I've really been investing in healthcare in Nigeria now for well over 20 years. I've had management training. I'm a chartered director, and I've also had a lot of opportunity to interact with private equity investors. Pathcare, which is a company that I co-founded with my wife, we have exited through an M&A transaction to Synlab. So I hope to share the experience that I've gained really on the journey and as an active participant in financing healthcare infrastructure in Nigeria. So why are we discussing this? I think that's really the first point that I'm going to try and make with my presentation. Then we're going to look at the state of healthcare in Nigeria. We're going to try and understand why we are where we are. And then I'm going to spend some time, though I'm not a finance guy, but I understand a bit generally to have some insights on the kind of options we should be making as we move forward. So ladies and gentlemen, I think, healthcare, unlike any other area, I think it's an important topic because the objective of financing healthcare to me is not about making money. We want to finance healthcare because healthcare is important. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights articulates the right to adequate health in Article 3, which means everyone has a right to liberty, to life, liberty, and security of the person. The enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being, without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic, or social condition. This, to me, places a responsibility on every government to at least strive for universal health coverage. And what do we mean by universal health coverage? Healthcare that is accessible, which is available and is responsive to the needs of the people, is of the right quality. This is very important because we can provide healthcare that does not meet the needs of the people because it's not fit for purpose. So it must be safe. The treatment that people receive must be effective, and it must be people-centered. And more importantly, everybody should be able to afford this. Is this a dream or is this a reality? Because there's an argument that there's nothing like free healthcare because someone has to pay for it. And certainly that's the position the Americans take. And there's an ongoing debate about healthcare in America. They spend more than anybody else on healthcare. They have relatively poor healthcare outcomes. And they argue that the government cannot really give free healthcare without taking money from somebody else. And therefore, the feeling in the States is that universal healthcare is an unrealistic utopia, as you cannot have healthcare that is accessible, affordable, and of the right quality at the same time. Choose two, but you can't have all three. So if your healthcare is affordable, then the quality must be suspect. And that debate still goes on. On the other side of the pond, in the UK, as far back as 1947, the NHS was formed by the Labour Party, and it suggests that the attainment of this utopian dream is one of political will. Because the health spend in the UK is a fraction of what they spend in America. The health indices are good. There are debates about the cost of the NHS as well as the future, but it remains the pride of Britain and is genuinely universal healthcare because all UK citizens receive all their healthcare requirements free at the point of delivery without reference to their ability to pay. 32 countries across the world have declared they've achieved some form of universal healthcare, and there are 11 of these in Africa, including Burkina Faso, Rwanda, and Ghana. And if you look at this chart, I think if you look at Nigeria and the UK and Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Rwanda that have achieved universal healthcare, it can be done on a shoestring budget through task shifting and redefining what we call healthcare and tailoring it to your own particular needs. We all know the issues with healthcare in Nigeria. I mean, we have more maternal 5 life expectancy rate in the world. Pneumonia, HIV, malaria, which we could argue are curable, account for 60% of premature deaths in Nigeria. And we have among the 20 highest death rates in the world. And on top of all of this, we have the tsunami of non-communicable diseases because of our changing lifestyle. So we have a significant issue that we have to deal with. And when we look at this, as well as when COVID came in, and if I can quote the sage from Omaha, Warren Buffett, said, only when the tide goes out do we discover who has been swimming naked. And ladies and gentlemen, COVID laid bare the underbelly of the Nigerian healthcare system. We really were not ready to deal with COVID, such as our proposed of infectious diseases, as I mentioned earlier, as well as communicable diseases, a rising middle class, an already existing healthcare infrastructure gap, because Nigeria falls short of the 2.7 beds per 1,000 of population that we should expect. So, and there's a study recently that says there's a $82 billion infrastructure gap that Nigeria needs to bridge. And then technology is also a driver, because technology adoption has been lauded as a way to leapfrog our healthcare infrastructure deficit, and there's been increased uptake during the lockdown. So with all these drivers saying that healthcare is really the place to go, we need to invest in healthcare. And indeed, there have been many reports promoting healthcare investments in Africa. I chose these two. There are a lot of them. And indeed, there's been an expansion of the availability of funding. Healthcare investments in Africa rises by 1.3 billion in 5 years. Foreign investors are gearing up to plug our 82 billion healthcare gap. Why has this money, and there's been a lot of activity, so why has this expansion not really transformed our healthcare space? And I think I need to spend some time trying to give you my own thoughts on this. But first, let's just take a view of the healthcare industry in Nigeria. So basically, if you look right across the value chain from the producers to the payers, we can say, right at the base here, but we can say there are 3 real, the way we approach healthcare, we talk about primary healthcare, which is basically your standard illnesses. I have a cough, I have a cold, I have malaria, I have a cut, I have a bump, I've broken my leg, to secondary care, which is really care that requires admission and some minor operations, to tertiary care. And in Nigeria, if I look at the government system, we have primary healthcare centers, we have the so-called general hospitals in this space, and then the tertiary hospitals at the top. Now, the regulatory framework in healthcare in Nigeria is really still needs a lot of work, because the Federal Ministry of Health regulates healthcare and generally, but then the Medical and Dental Council licenses doctors. There's a Nursing and Midwifery Council for nursing. There's a Pharmacist Council. There's a Medical Laboratory Council. NAFDAC looks after the drugs. Then there's radiographic registration is different. So all these regulatory structures, as they sit, just give you a right to participate. And none of them are integrated towards outcome and looking at patient outcomes. And these are challenges that we need to deal with. And I'll talk about that later. So if you look at healthcare spend also in Nigeria, 73% is in the private sector, which is really why we're having this discussion, because only 27 is in the public. And how do we accelerate and support the performance of the private sector, which is really where most of the healthcare is provided? And as I mentioned earlier, most of the financing in the private sector is out of pocket, and most people don't have health insurance. So really, in summary, we have demand side problems in terms of accessibility. quality and the inability to pay. And then we have supply side in terms of infrastructure gaps. We have a lot of skill challenges, and we have funding challenges, which I will spend the rest of this talk on funding. So if we look at the forces that shape the profitability of the healthcare industry, a lot is really stacked against us and profitability. So generally, at the macro level, we have issues like, Boko Haram, kidnapping, IPOB. We have elections are forthcoming. Economic, rising inflation, unemployment, forex challenges. At the technology level, there are a lot of health startups, and they're disrupting the current state of play. And then, as I said earlier, the regulatory framework is not integrated towards outcomes. At the industry level, and if I use a framework like Porter's 5 forces, Porter's 5 forces basically says there are 5 forces that shape the profitability of an industry, looks at the barriers to entry of that industry. If the barriers to entry are high, then there are few players and profitability is protected. But in healthcare, as I said earlier, every doctor who has a medical degree has a right to try and build his own hospital. It's not the same in other industries. The fact that you have a banking degree doesn't mean you can set up a bank. But in Nigeria, because you have a healthcare degree, you can set up a hospital. And these are issues we need to discuss. Because the barriers to entry are low, the industry rivalry is very high. So there's a lot of competition. That also reduces profitability. As we've said, most people have to pay out of pocket. We're not a rich country. A lot of people can't afford healthcare. So that also puts a challenge on participation and ability to make money, provide financial sustainability. So that also challenges profitability. We have very few medical equipment suppliers or consumable suppliers that are in Nigeria. So we have to spend a lot of money on suppliers. At any time, if you look at large healthcare companies, that will be between 100, 200 billion that are sitting in the shelves to allow you to support your 3-month order cycle. And that is a real challenge also to profitability. And I'll put it to you that that's probably adds something like 20% inefficiency to cost of sales and also cash flow. And then substitute products. In patients' minds, there are products, there are substitutes. So they go to churches, they go to traditional medical practitioners, because the regulatory framework does not drive that attendance to hospital as one of the things we do. So in terms of how we seek health, we go to a lot of places. All of this affects the profitability of the industry. There are other specific factors. Brain drain. There are more Nigerian doctors working abroad than in Nigeria. So as we build our infrastructure, where are the doctors that are going to drive these hospitals? There are other ecosystem challenges because the healthcare value chain is still in evolution. So basically, we don't have primary care infrastructure. Most people with primary care needs will go to a hospital. And I have a bit of malaria, I will go to a hospital, which means the cost is higher. Then the concept of solopreneur is also an important one because most Nigerian hospitals, as we see, are sole proprietorships, where there's a doctor who has built his own hospital, and that's 90% of the hospitals you're going to see. And you really can't invest in one doctor's productive capacity. So most hospitals are not set up for investment. And then medical tourism. I mean, it is said that we spend more procuring healthcare abroad than we do in Nigeria. And that's a reflection of the level of trust that people have on the system. And I think regulation needs to focus more on patient outcomes than it currently does. So what we have really with all of this is that most people that are providing healthcare swim upstream, because the feeling is that really that's where patients can afford it. So we're going to focus, we're going to be in Victoria Island, we're going to be in Lekki, we're going to be in Ikoyi, and where we're going to provide services to ultra HNIs and HNIs. But then that is still a very small proportion of the market. And how can you scale in this space? These are questions we need to ask. And really, my view is that this area where we're looking at the middle class and lower class, that's really a big opportunity. And how do we provide sustainable financing for projects that are targeted at the vast majority of Nigerians? So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a long lead time to profitability within the healthcare industry with all these challenges that I have defined. And I think that is important, because if we're going to look at funding healthcare, we need to take this into consideration. Because if there's a long lead time to profitability, then we need to be careful that we finance projects according to where they are on the business cycle. Because, we need to obviously look at more a blend of private capital and development funding as a way of funding healthcare. Now, the reliance generally we've had is reliance on retail equity, loans, short-term commercial paper, angel and VC funding, private equity funding. And all of these are quite expensive. And the return expectations, I believe, are higher than the returns that our industry can deliver at this stage of development. So I think there needs to be a bigger focus on development funding, intervention funds, grants and aids, impact and investment funds than on private capital at this stage. And then I've recently been looking at social impact sukuk bonds. And I think the concept of sharing risk, where if you're not making profit, you can delay the return payments until you start making profit, I think really lends itself very suitably to the healthcare infrastructure funding. So this is really a structure, and I think we need to really understand that most healthcare projects, because they tend to be asset heavy, will be cash flow negative for perhaps longer than most other projects. And while we are cash flow negative, the type of financing really needs to take that into consideration. Because, private equity, like I said, I've had experience with private equity, and I know that the way they're structured, return expectations are high. Now, and also with the short-term horizon, high return expectation, I'm not sure, I question the role of private equity at this stage of our development of healthcare. I think once we have structures, private equity can come and do what it does very well, which is to help to consolidate the space of more mature assets. But these are things that I would love to discuss with the panel. So if we look at the evolution of Nigerian healthcare, the system has always been built around the medical professional. Every doctor wants to own his own hospital. So the medical landscape is littered with hospitals of various shapes and sizes, as well as delivery capability. So most of the time when you go and see a doctor, you will, if you're sick enough, you will get admitted. So the cost of delivery is high because the doctor has got a loan, he needs to meet his financial returns, and therefore there's a tendency to do more than perhaps should be necessary. And the truth is that 80% of healthcare needs can be met in outpatient clinics. So the need for these hospitals and the focus on building hospitals may not be the way forward. And we need to really think on maybe in more asset-light models rather than, because if you think about a hospital, the average hospital, you put money in it, it's a real estate project. So the asset turnover is very low. And so if you take short-term money and you put it into real estate, and indeed most hospitals structures are built with property companies which are really financed by medical real estate trusts, as opposed to just using private equity money to build a hospital. So these are things we need to be careful about. And the truth about it is that technology is really today bringing healthcare to the consumer and it's changing the landscape. So when we're redefining and looking at healthcare, we shouldn't think of what we have today. We should think of what it should be like tomorrow with a focus on using technology to leapfrog. I know Vitality from Discovery is basically a concept that incentivizes consumers to live healthily and eat healthily and promote wellness. And because if you're well, then you don't need to go to the hospital. And I know Discovery Vitality, and I know they've just signed with one of the Nigerian health insurance companies. So they're coming in here. So these are the areas that are changing the landscape. So it's no longer paying insurance and waiting to be sick to go to hospital, but it's actually making sure we keep you healthy and prevent you from going to hospital. Rocket Health is a company that's paying out of Uganda. I like their model because what they're doing is basically providing primary care on technology. So you can approach them with telemedicine, you can order your laboratory tests, you can get your pharmaceuticals. All of this can be supplied from the comfort of your couch. And if you need to go into a clinic, then fine. You have clinics that you can go into to get your care. Raw Health is playing also here in Nigeria, and their proposition is that they're a marketplace for health insurance. So, and their vision is increasing the expansion of health insurance beyond the current less than 10% by bringing more retail solutions to it. Logistocks is trying to look at the challenges that I talked about with supplies, and maybe by warehousing all the inefficiencies into the company and then dissipating it through economies of scale. MediCenter is focused on providing outpatient clinics, so there's really no need to go to hospital. And the focus of providing outpatient clinics is providing cheaper but good quality healthcare. Because by the time you add the cost of infrastructure in a hospital, healthcare delivery becomes expensive. There's a big future with wearable technology and cloud computing, where we can increase our ability to monitor patients. And I think Discovery is starting what they call a virtual hospital from January 2022. Basically, they're using the argument that, fine, if most people don't need to be admitted, then the few that maybe we could admit fewer of them in hospital by monitoring services at home, so that the cost of deploying infrastructure can be managed and reduce the need to build these expensive hospitals. So, ladies and gentlemen, what are the opportunities? And like I said, we have to reimagine healthcare to create a healthcare system of the future, not trying to make what we have, because what we have is modeled on what the West has developed. We don't have the money to create that same kind of infrastructure. So we need to think about where we should be going. And like I said, outpatient care focus, where we really provide services that patients can go in without the need to be admitted all the time. We need to look at domiciliation of diagnostic capabilities. There's been expansion in the diagnostic space, but a lot of our tests are still being shipped abroad. So there are opportunities there. I've talked about medical consumable logistics, delivering just-in-time supplies. Then PPPs are also a big space. I mean, at LASUTH, we have now about 15 PPPs. And basically, we're looking at services all right across the value chain, because it's expensive for the government to provide a lot of these services. And if you can outsource it to the private sector, where we have large volumes of patients who really, and provided the pricing is targeted to that level, then there's a big opportunity here as well. There are opportunities for consolidation, both on the supply side, in terms of organizing the healthcare landscape from what we currently have. Like I said, they focus more on outpatient, then fewer hospitals. We still need hospitals, but if we do this, we don't need as many as we currently tend to have. And then I've talked about, then also the demand side in terms of health insurance. A lot of our focus today on HMO, I think, needs to evolve to health insurance, where the risk is really carried and people can have real financial comfort as opposed to semblance thereof. And then medical real estate trusts, if we must build hospitals, because these allow long-term funding of these assets. So, ladies and gentlemen, just to conclude, the takeaway point is that there's a big problem to solve with healthcare in Nigeria. we must invest with an understanding of the challenges of the sector. Yes, there's a problem, but we don't rush at it by throwing money at it. I think there's enough experience on the table to show that this is not the way to go. Our financing options must be innovative, and they must match the return expectations of the project. The approach should be a focus on blended finance to mitigate the risks of purely commercial money. Like I said, Islamic Sukuk bonds and the concept of risk sharing may play an increasingly important role in the development of healthcare infrastructure in Nigeria. And lastly, we need to reimagine healthcare to create healthcare infrastructure of the future driven by technology. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me. I'll be very happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi. That was a well prepared presentation and quite detailed. And I would say it covered the field. If you have questions, and this is to the attendees, please, we can take your questions in the Q&A box. And after the panel session, we'll take all the questions together. We want to go into the panel session now so that we will discuss the issues as Dr. has raised. I think it's still hot now, and we should make it a bit hotter as it is. Then equally, before we enter into the panel session, I want to introduce one other member of the panel. I apologize. I think I missed him in the course of the introduction. And I'm speaking of Mr. Kieran Gordon. Mr. Kieran Gordon is the Chief Executive Officer of the Total Health Trust Limited, HMO, and Health Maintenance Organization in Nigeria. Total Health Trust, THT, is one of the top tier HMOs in Nigeria, and I'm sure by the time you count 1 to 3 HMOs, THT must be mentioned. Mr. Kieran Gordon is an experienced financial and operational professional. He's equally a fellow of the Actuarial Society of South Africa. Mr. Kieran Gordon has successfully built teams across Africa and particularly in Nigeria from his work and his service in THT. And I want to say welcome to Mr. Gordon again and thank him for indulging us and participating as a panelist in this webinar. Kieran?
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Toyosi.
Yeah.
No problem for missing me out. I will not take offense. It's good to be here.
Apologies. Thank you so much. And so, distinguished panelists, I would want to invite you now and have us look at issues that has arisen from Dr. Ajayi's keynote presentation. And I want to particularly call on Mrs. Awoboro at this time. And flowing from Dr. Ajayi's presentation, one thing is clear, that we have an infrastructure gap in the healthcare sector. We equally have a financing gap in the healthcare sector. Just looking at the budget, the proposed budget for next year, one sees that healthcare provision in the budget is quite low. And again, when one looks at the comments from the Permanent Secretary of the Federal Ministry of Health as far back as 2019, it was estimated that there is a need for, at the minimum, 10 billion US dollars for investment in bridging the gap in healthcare infrastructure in Nigeria. And so it's clearly obvious that, I'm looking at the government's security challenges, it's obvious that there's a gap. It's obvious also that it's quite difficult for the government to meet this gap. And so the private sector comes in, like Dr. Ajayi rightly observed. And so, Mrs. Awogboro, from your experience, in private equity sector, and also with your current engagement as one of the founding directors and should I say sponsors of Evercare Hospital, what are your thoughts, in breaching the financing or funding gap in Nigeria's healthcare sector?
Thank you for that question, Toyosi, and thank you, Dr. Ajayi, for such a sort of holistic overview of the sector, the opportunities and the challenges. So, as I believe it was Chinyere rightly mentioned, the pandemic massively exposed the shortcomings of Africa's healthcare infrastructure deficit, especially when we come to Nigeria. For example, it became clear that we didn't have sufficient number of ventilators or ICU beds, I think 350 ICU beds for a 200 million population, and probably less when you adjust for those beds that are actually operational, functional, and appropriately staffed. I think most recent estimates show that Nigeria needs an additional 386,000 hospital beds to reach the global average of 2.7 hospital beds per 1,000 people. So that just gives context to the scale of the deficit that we are talking about, and the magnitude of the challenge that sort of faces us. Historically, the healthcare sector and healthcare has been funded by donors, NGOs. However, we've seen over time that the funding was declining, and was also has been primarily focused on primary care, communicable diseases, in a market where you have a double disease burden and a significant need for secondary and tertiary care interventions. So the good thing, and at least from my journey and the path that I've been on, is there's been a remarkable momentum in terms of institutional capital coming into the healthcare space. I started this journey with Evercare Impact Fund, as part of the fundraising team to actually try and sell this concept to the investors. And it wasn't an easy and an obvious sell, because for the obvious reasons that Dr. Ajayi mentioned, in terms of how private equity and institutional capital has traditionally seen the healthcare sector. Long payback periods, profitability challenges, the ability to pay issue, demand side challenges, supply side challenges. And I remember bringing, combination of DFIs to Nigeria, taking them around the facilities and trying to convince them that this was a worthy investment and the right time to make the investment. Now, fast forward today, we've seen large institutional investors looking to play in the healthcare space. And I think that's obviously a net positive for the sector. We, in 2015, were able to bring together uniquely some of the world's largest DFIs, also some of the world's largest equipment manufacturers, and then global philanthropic organizations to raise $1 billion. Today, that portfolio has grown from just a pool of capital to 30 hospitals, 20 clinics, 80 diagnostic centers across 6 countries with over 11,000 employees. So we've seen it can be done. It's a drop in the ocean in terms of the need, but it shows the strong role that private sector can play and should play in terms of contributing to bridging the funding gap. And so I think, putting that sort of private equity and institutional investor hat on, African countries, leaders, our governments have to be more focused on how we can mobilize private sector investment to the sector. And this requires a convergence. And this is something that, increasingly I've been speaking about, and I've been lucky enough to sort of get a platform to be able to continue speaking about, which is the convergence of public sector and private sector. Gone are the days where we could say private sector doesn't operate in a vacuum, and we can't continue to operate in silos. Everyone has a role to play. And so, the role of the public sector is very important in creating the enabling environment for private sector funds to mobilize into financing and contributing to financing this gap. Three interventions that are top of mind for me as we think through the challenges that we have just operating Evercare within this market. One, and which is the topic of this seminar, the need to improve access to financing. CBN's move, the central bank's move to open up access to the intervention fund windows for healthcare operators is a welcome one, and I think more needs to be done on this space in this space to at least de-risk some of these healthcare investments and also provide sort of a blended financing solution in addition to the private capital that's coming through. Secondly, I think there's a big need to, as Dr. Ajayi touched upon in his opening remarks, restructure the demand side and look at risk pooling and demand side aggregation. Out-of-pocket expenditure is one of the inefficient ways to finance healthcare. Risk pooling is widely regarded as a better and more equitable method of financing healthcare. And so there's a lot of work that can be done on the government side in terms of looking at reforms, potentially in line with the Pension Reform Act that mandates employers to provide health insurance and some sort of universal health insurance scheme. And by the way, if you're able to fix the demand side and the ability to pay issue, it dramatically unlocks additional funding from the private sector in terms of addressing the infrastructure gap. And I think the final thing I would say in terms of the importance of public sector in creating an enabling environment is to develop and enforce quality standards. One of the biggest challenges we've seen in the healthcare sector in Nigeria is that the trust is completely broken. And so we need to find a way to rebuild that trust between doctors and patients and really across the value chain. It's commonly known that Nigeria loses over $1 billion annually to other markets in the form of medical tourism. And so even when you have the investment and you put the investment, the people who can afford it typically are more inclined to still get on a plane and seek care elsewhere. How do we rebuild trust in the system such that we're really reversing that medical tourism and patronizing the institutions that are being built for the market? So those are my initial thoughts on the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Awoboro. Grateful for those comments. And I want to invite other panelists if they have, one or two comments. I'm happy to have their comments as well. But a quick second question, Ms. Awoboro. It's from Dr. Ajayi's earlier presentation. He mentioned that there is a need for a blended finance structure within the healthcare industry to bridge some of the gap. Now, would you say this is also, would you agree with this? And from your experience, what would be the funding mix you would recommend or suggest for the industry?
Absolutely. I think, it's clear that there is a need for a blended financing structure, and that structure may evolve as, the project or the life cycle of the asset evolves. On the equity side, one of the things that we were very focused on is you couldn't bring traditional sort of private equity constructs to finance the sort of healthcare ecosystems that we were looking to finance. And so one of the first things we were focused on is the need for patient capital. So rather than the traditional 3 to 5 year exit horizons of the traditional private equity model, fixed life funds, what we did was actually reconstructed or at least refined the fund structuring model such that it gave a longer horizon to adjust for the longer payback periods in healthcare. So rather than a typical 10-year fund, we had 10-year fund with 2 successive 2-year extensions, making it potentially a 14-year fund. So that was very important in terms of sort of matching the potential life cycle of the investments that we were focused on the equity side. Now, while we still have, the traditional cost of capital that is common with private equity, we were also focused on bringing in the right strategic partners to help accelerate the ramp up of the assets and also further de-risk with the likes of a Philips or a Medtronic as investors in the fund. And the third thing that I would say in terms of on the equity side was the flexibility to not just do traditional private equity, which is the acquisitions and consolidations, but actually to go into the greenfield space. And that was, in Nigeria, we spent 2 years trying to find an asset to buy, and we went back to the investment committee and made the case to actually build. And because we had that flexibility within the fund mandate, it was something we were able to do, and that is what has birthed Evercare Hospital Lekki, sort of work to be done. I referenced the interbank, and so I think there's scope for more intervention funds, that are accessible to providers in the markets. On the commercial side, when we were discussing with commercial funders on debt funding a couple of years back, it was a no-go. Now I would say there is a shift in terms of appetite. There is a shift in terms of mindset, but the terms still need to be reflective and nuanced for the realities of the sector. And so that is everything from longer tenures, sculpted amortization profiles, lower yields, and then the collateral package that they tend to look at needs to be reworked for it to make sense as a viable blended financing solution for the healthcare space. And then I think there are a lot of innovative solutions, for example, diaspora bonds and diaspora investment funds. So this is a way for you to create instruments that enable us to mobilize diaspora investments into the sector. And interestingly, India has used a combination of these incentives to stimulate diaspora investment into their healthcare services. And 9 of the top 15 hospitals in India actually have been set up through such investments. So I think there's a lot of work to be done around alternative financing models that can plug into that blended financing solution and can make it more viable.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those comments, Zalboro, and I think it's quite on the point. I'll be moving on to Mr. Kieran Gordon, and please, Mr. Gordon, you would recall that quality healthcare is crucial, certainly, and the HMO sector is there essentially to plug gaps in terms of cost recovery for healthcare institutions, and also manage cost and make healthcare affordable to Nigerians. And so in terms of healthcare infrastructure, how can HMOs assist in plugging this gap? And what are the expectations, from the regulatory side, from your own view? We know that the NHIS has a lot of role to play in the health maintenance organizations side. And so, what do you think are the expectations, and how can the HMOs, assist in plugging a section, at the very least, some sections of this gap, if possible?
Okay, great, thank you. So, I guess the increase in the coverage of health insurance, there's no doubt that it'll have it becomes this virtual circle in terms of encouraging and actually increasing investment in infrastructure. On the flip side, though, you know, there is also a sort of vicious circle or a debt spiral that things can get into. So if there isn't enough investments in infrastructure, and there aren't enough reasonable hospitals available, the demand for health insurance sort of disappears. So you have this odd trade-off between the two. You know, the increasing participation, increasing the coverage, getting more people enrolled in some form of health insurance definitely injects more money into the overall health system, because there's greater flows. You know, there's more money in the system, so there's greater flows going out to the providers, because the bulk of the money that we collect on behalf of our clients goes out to providers to provide the services to those members. You know, so we actually sell a product that ultimately we don't provide or we don't fulfill. It's a sort of strange business model almost. But those greater flows going out to the providers will, you know, there's no doubt that then encourages investment, because if your money is coming in the door, and you have greater certainty around how, you know, what your patient flow looks like, how many feet you can get through the door, you know, what kind of numbers you can see, that will automatically encourage investments. And we've just heard the need for patient capital, and there's no doubt about that. But being able to get greater certainty on your revenue stream encourages people to put capital in and to lock capital away. One of the other sides, sort of slightly different tack of increasing participation in health insurance, is that it'll give the health insurance companies more data and greater accessibility of data and a bigger database from which to work. And once you have that, you can then do further analysis, you can do deeper analysis, and that allows you to set more accurate pricing. And ultimately, and I think that's both on the customer side and on the provider side, and ultimately that benefits the whole system, because the right cost is being paid. If you battle with that data, or the data is inaccurate, the pricing becomes a little uncertain, and the members' value for money perception sort of disappears. On the regulatory side, maybe just I guess a comment. We currently have I think 60 health insurers in the country. So increasing the number of health insurers is clearly not the answer. But unfortunately, the vast majority of those health insurers are quite small, they're subscale, and they just simply are not, it's not possible for them to be sustainable. So will they be here next year? Will they be here in 2 years' time? It's a very questionable statement. There are definitely, though, a much smaller number, but a group of health insurers that have built good businesses and proper sustainable businesses on proper business principles. They're well capitalized. And so I think, from a regulatory point of view, I think from our side, we'd actually like to see the industry reduce in the number, not to the point where there's no competition, but certainly to allow greater concentration of lives, which ultimately benefits those organizations, which has this virtuous benefits on the whole industry. These kind of subscale organizations that sort of get started up, they tend to have this, and we've seen it, and certainly the frustration has been expressed to us by the providers and in the public, where there's an increased incidence of claims not being honored. What happens there is it gives health insurance a bad name. And I think we see it in the other insurance lines in Nigeria, and that doesn't help build any trust with the market. So you're not going to give your money to a health insurer if you don't know that when the time comes, you're actually going to get your claim paid. So there's a lot of frustration expressed by members. There's a lot of frustration expressed by healthcare providers. Our view is definitely, without a doubt, is our first priority to pay claims when those are due and not to frustrate anyone. And in that way, you can actually build trust in the system. That's definitely one way to build up. If you start building up trust, you gain a reputation of a trustworthy industry, and more people start to participate. I think maybe just to expand on the regulatory thing a little bit more, but really what we're looking for, and I think this is really where we'd love to see the NHIS playing a far stronger role, is consistent and equitable regulation, but that's enforced fairly across the whole sector. So both across all the HMOs, but also where the NHIS gets involved in accrediting healthcare providers between the health insurers and the healthcare providers as well, because depending on the political sway of the week, we sometimes see it's skewing to one side or another, and that frustrates the other party. I think having Dr. Ajay talked about just the sheer number of different regulators, but I don't think it's a great idea to have one regulator regulate health insurers and try to license the healthcare providers. I think there's better balance achieved if those two things certainly are separated out. I think just to kind of come back to the theme of overall increasing participation and so increasing the investment, greater collaboration between the HMOs and the government health agencies. That's both at the state and the national level. At the moment, unfortunately, there's a little bit of competition between the two. So the health regulators are also players, and that frustrates. I think that frustrates everybody. I think we operate in different worlds, and we should be clear where our patches are, and everybody should be allowed to play or partner in their space. I think one of the key things, I think there's a lot of corporates that provide health insurance, but I think obviously the key space, and this goes to so many things in Nigeria, is being able to crack the retail space. If you can crack the individual market for healthcare, that is where there's a significant opportunity to increase this coverage. The challenge with it is you have to have extremely low cost distribution, extremely low cost and low intrusive underwriting, and you need the patience then to build the scale. Ultimately, the going into the retail market, if 10,000 lives is not enough, because of the purchasing power that's available, the product would be very low cost, and you need to get significant scale that way, and you have to be patient enough to build that scale. That sort of buying power is a key factor, which is why scale becomes so important, and hence the ability to do it low cost. And it kind of loops me back to a point I was making a little bit earlier around being able to price that accurately. So having access to this data, being able to get the right price for that market is really crucial.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. Your comments are well taken, and it's clear that the HMO is crucial in developing the healthcare sector. Without the funds, without the cost recovery from the HMOs, we can't really say that we are plugging the gaps, in terms of funding. And thank you for your comments. I will move on to Dr. Abayomi Sule now. One of the positive outcomes, I would say, flowing from the COVID-19 lockdowns we had last year was the penetration of technology in healthcare in Nigeria. And it clearly plays a key role now in healthcare in Nigeria. And so I'm going to ask you, Dr. Sule, what role do you think, healthcare, health tech, I would say, can play? What additional roles do you think can play in facilitating increased health insurance penetration? I understand that CarePay has an InsurTech similar service. It would be good to also speak around this and how you think this bridges the gap in infrastructure in Nigeria and assist healthcare providers as well as the patients to have access to healthcare in Nigeria.
Thank you, Toyosi, for inviting me to this webinar. So first of all, maybe just to describe who we are at CarePay. We are a healthcare fintech or insurtech. We started operations in 20 in Nigeria and Tanzania. We provide a proprietary digital platform for distribution and administration of a wide range of health schemes. We essentially have a platform that helps to create digital trust bridges between the stakeholders in the health financing ecosystem. And these stakeholders are, of course, the payer, the HMOs, the health insurance companies, perhaps the corporates as well, and then the providers and the members of the health schemes. Before I go into your question, I'd like to speak to the challenges we have in the health financing ecosystem, which ties into what the other participants have actually spoken to previously. The major challenges, in my opinion, one is a challenge of growth or stagnation, depending on which side you look at it at. So in the last 15 years or thereabout, we've had very minimal growth within the health insurance space in Nigeria. I believe right now there are probably just about 10 million Nigerians that are insured, so coverage is around just 5%. And there is no how we can have development of our healthcare ecosystem without fixing this health financing conundrum as well. Because if I go back to one of the rating reports that ranks health systems in the world, if you look at the top 5 countries, health insurance penetration is over 80%. But if you go to the other side, the bottom 5, of which Nigeria, unfortunately, was part of that number, health insurance penetration within the bottom 5 is just less than 40%. And of course, with Nigeria at 5%, you can imagine that that's an abysmal place to be in. So it's a challenge of stagnation, not just stagnation, it's also the quality of the stagnation, so to speak. Most health insurance players at the moment are focused at the corporate end of the market, and that market, in my opinion, is not likely to grow, given the fact that we're very much an informal economy. So in that space, we probably have 3 million private employees covered. We have another maybe 3 million from NHIS covered as well. And then we have lately the state health insurance schemes covering around 46 million. And if you look at who are those covered within those state health insurance schemes, it's civil servants and the vulnerable, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong. But unfortunately, the approach is not likely to scale as well, because there is a limit to government resources. The government is actually being the one subsidizing most of the people that are covered under the state health insurance scheme. So if we're really going to make any progress, very much like Kieran said, we have to crack the retail health insurance space. Interestingly, there was a poll that was released last week by NOI Polls, and it shows that 50% of Nigerians are not aware of the NHIS, and a whopping 89% don't even know how to go about getting health cover. They don't know that many of these HMOs exist. Even if they know, they don't know how to treat them to be able to procure health insurance benefits. So the first thing, like I said, the first challenge is challenge of stagnation in terms of health insurance penetration. Second, I would say it's a challenge of efficiency. You will find out that many of the current health insurance players are running at losses, even some of the big players, because they're simply paying out much more than they're collecting from the corporates or from the individuals that are insured with them. This situation is not good for the HMOs themselves, also not good for the providers and for the corporates or the individuals that have paid them to receive health insurance coverage. Because if you're paying out more than you receive, it means that you will not be able to pay your claims promptly, like Kieran has said. and indeed you may be teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. There's a lot of wasted time, energy, and effort, largely around perhaps the configuration of most of the HMOs, or perhaps more precisely around the fact that the entire industry is largely non-digitized. I know a few of the big players have digital systems in place, but if you dive deep, you find out that most of the HMOs and hospitals in the country do not use any digital systems. And as you know, with paper-based systems, there's a lot of friction. Many of us who have health insurance schemes, remember, we have to carry ID cards. When we go to the hospital, we have to show our ID cards. If we don't have our ID cards, HMO ID cards, we're turned back. Because it's paper-based systems, they don't find our names on the list sometimes, even though it might be there, or maybe the list is not even sent, or it was sent and the list was with someone who is not on duty at that point in time. Sometimes people are verified as being eligible, but they don't get what they paid for. And on the converse side also, people sometimes get more than what they were paid for, to the loss of the providers, because they simply cannot translate everybody's cover, which is on a paper document, into actual action that matches what they have, that is commensurate with the cover they have subscribed to and payments that the HMO can guarantee. So both on the payer side and on the provider side, and I guess on even the member side, there is a lot of loss or wastage, inefficiency in terms of time, energy, and effort, like I mentioned. The third challenge, I think, is access to financing, both on the demand side and on the supply side. The truth of the matter is, given the sort of per capita incomes we have in the country, it's very difficult for most people to be able to pay for health insurance premiums in one go. So one challenge many people have is inability to afford healthcare insurance products, or perhaps even healthcare in general. So there is really a need to have demand-side financing in place to be able to lock the opportunity in terms of more uptake of healthcare and health insurance products. On the supply side as well, it's very important that healthcare facilities have access to working capital. At the moment, most healthcare facilities do not, for a variety of reasons, largely around the fact that they are unbankable. Either they don't have a regular stream of income, or even the income that they have is unverifiable. I know a lot has been said about the fact that we don't have enough beds, which is true, but I think the greatest challenge today is the fact that even the beds we have are not being filled. And if will not be filled, if people don't have access to health insurance products or financing that would enable them pay for these services. So the three top challenges in my mind within the healthcare financing ecosystem, which impacts on the infrastructure and performance of the health system, like I mentioned, is the fact that we have stagnating health insurance penetration, inefficiencies within the system, and also the fact that we don't have access to financing. So what are the solutions we at CarePay are providing to mitigate these challenges? First is that we have a digital marketplace, which we've launched in Kenya and we will be launching in Nigeria in December. The digital marketplace is in collaboration with a number of leading telcos. So with those telcos, we will be able to distribute health insurance products at marginal cost. That challenge Kieran has already spoken of. So why, I hope, can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah.
You can hear.
So why you have a lot of success within the corporate market is that you're able to deploy a direct sales force that reaches the HR, and from the HR, you're able to reach most members of staff. But you can't do that for individuals or households. You need a distribution mechanism that is low cost, and therefore partnering with the telcos. And as you know, most Nigerians have phones in their pockets. We will be able to segment the market in terms of who can afford what, where they live, and what products they need, and distribute health insurance products to them digitally. In practice, what this means is that we'll have segmentation based on geography, based on income spent on the network. They will receive an SMS message saying that this is why you should buy health insurance. Of course, some of them will click on it, go to the marketplace. They will see at the moment about 5 HMOs already on that platform. We're hoping to get more, but with the first bounce of the ball, I think we're okay with the first five movers. They will see a variety of products ranging between 15,000 to 100,000 naira, which they can select and buy from. Of course, they can do this without having to visit any office. They can do this on their phone, which is very convenient. In that system also, we're having an identity management solution and payment solution as well, so that they can pay also for the selected health insurance products. So that's what we have in terms of increasing health insurance penetration. So with the partnership with the telcos, we will of course be creating awareness. We will be leveraging their brand equity. These telco players already brands that are more known to Nigerians than perhaps the HMOs. So a combination of the brand equity of the HMOs, the telcos, and our own brand, we expect to have a lot of impact in terms of health insurance penetration within the retail health space in particular. Secondly, in terms of efficiency, we have a platform as a service, an artificial intelligence platform as a service, which manages the healthcare financing customer journey from end to end, from registration to enrollment, access to care, claims management, claims processing, and claims adjudication and payment as well. This platform at the moment is in used by about 21 payers in Nigeria and Kenya, and we have over 5 million individuals on that platform. And this platform has demonstrated a lot of value to the players that we collaborate with. Historically, turnaround time for claims in the industry is around 120 to 180 days, but with our platform, because everything is real time, as long as the HMO or payer has a good balance sheet, they're able to pay their claims within 24 to 48 hours. So we've reduced the turnaround times for claims management from 120 days to about 48 hours. Therefore, this is really a key, shall I say, value proposition or benefit in the market, because one of the challenges we have in the market today is that the velocity of payments is very, very slow. If the HMOs don't pay, the providers either have to take a working capital loan, or if they don't have it, it means that they will continue to use substitute inputs, which may be poor and not commensurate with the sort of quality they should provide. And thirdly, I talked about the challenge of financing. Our platform also offers lending as a service infrastructure. We collaborate with a number of lenders based on the digital connections with the providers and the HMOs. There is visibility on the transactions that are being made by these providers. So it is very, very easy for the lenders to understand the cash flow of the hospitals and therefore advance a loan appropriately. On our marketplace as well, we intend to collaborate with buy now, pay later lenders, so that people can essentially afford to pay their health insurance premiums monthly or perhaps quarterly, as the case may be. There's really a challenge with fragmenting health insurance products. So what we see is that most payers within the space keep their health insurance products as is. So the opportunity is more on the financing side to ensure that you can find a way for people to pay in installments. So this really is who we are and what we do. We do strongly feel that collaborating with the stakeholders like Temi and Kiran, we can do a whole lot in this market to advance health insurance penetration, and therefore provide guaranteed cash flows to providers and also individuals as well, to ensure that there is more financing in the market or ecosystem, against which will definitely, in our opinion, also help to galvanize further investments in the healthcare space.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sule. Well received. Well received. I'm going to quickly move on to Mr. Olugbenjo of Stanbic IBTC Infrastructure Fund. Mr. Olugbenjo is the money man. I'm sure he's going to tell us how to get the money to bridge this gap. And relating that to Dr. Ajayi's earlier keynote presentation, where Dr. Ajayi indicated that what you have for 90% of the hospital structure in Nigeria is you have solopreneurs, solo doctors setting up their hospitals, and just as Dr. Sule just mentioned now, most of these hospitals are not digitized. You have a huge problems with records and the like. And so, as Dr. Ajayi said, some of those projects, it will seem not to be bankable. So, Mr. Lubenjo, in terms of securing investment, generally in the healthcare sector, of course, we know there are several sections in the healthcare sector. Of course, it's not limited just to hospitals alone. What would investors need to look out for, as well as even the players, in creating bankable healthcare infrastructure products? And what type of healthcare infrastructure projects? I understand that Stanbic IBTC has that infrastructure fund. Is there healthcare in your fund? And you've heard Mrs. Awoboro and also Dr. Ajayi talk about a mixed funding kind of situation, what Dr. Ajayi called a blended finance structure. Are there thoughts towards this in the industry? And we'll be grateful to hear your comments, Mr. Olubenjo.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And maybe I should first say congratulations to JEE on your 25th anniversary. Well, I think it must have been a journey to get to this point. So well done and congratulations to the team. I think a lot has been said already, and my intervention here is not to repeat some of the very poignant points that the panelists, Dr. Ajayi, Timi Awoboro, as mentioned, Karen and the last speaker as well as mentioned, Mr. Sule. I think for me, I want to kind of create some inconvenience, and I'll try to do so in 3 minutes. It has often been said that finance is the problem, and I'm going to try and demystify that. I would say that maybe that was a problem, and it's still a problem to a very large extent, but it is not the biggest of problems at this point. That would be my submission, and I'm happy to be challenged. I think finance wants to have, financial providers, investors, they want to have a return. Custodians of finance also have a mandate to deliver a return. And so in order not to miss on that mandate, they have to be very thorough, and they have to co-create or make sure they have certainty that the investments they're making on behalf of within their fiduciary responsibilities are one that they're able to be accountable for. And so how do you unlock it? And that's the crux of the question you've posed to me. When you look at within this construct, when you look at the players, the interaction of different players, when you're asking for financing, what the financier the risk they want to take is the demand risk. That I want to take a risk on the payment, the ability of people, traffic to come into the hospital, to make payments. That is the risk that I want to access. But what are we posed with? You're posed with within a standard project, as an example, you're confronted with the payment, the risk of construction. You're confronted with the risk of equipment supply. Those are risks that we don't really want to take. You're confronted with the risk of regulation. You're confronted with the risk of this payment point that has been addressed. And now you're asking for capital in an environment where that capital is not necessarily patient. That capital wants to be returned every quarter. And so you take it and then you choke. You choke because your working capital cycle is not even enough to provide buy your supplies and still pay the banks every month. So there's a mismatch in that capital structure. And that is how the industry has been kind of grinding very hard to solve it. And so I think the point about convergence is one I want to highlight, that all those risks needs to be eliminated. How do you eliminate it? You have a healthcare project across the value chain. It cannot be that that healthcare project is given to someone that has not proven, that cannot indemnify. For example, you're constructing a 120-bed hospital and you're using a contractor that cannot indemnify that it will construct on time and to the right specifications. That is one risk that, as a financer, you don't want to be taking a construction risk. Equipment supply. Yes, sometimes you find out clients come to you and say, we want to buy this big diagnostic equipment. And there's not a lot to say about what happens after it's bought. What are the indemnities? What are the warranties? Is it a 10-year warranty? How do you make a payment? And all of those buckets of problems needs to be sorted out. And my honest view, I think once all of that are pieced together, the risks are clearly biportioned and given to and allocated across the value chain, finance would come. We have set up this infrastructure fund, and one of the key mandates is in healthcare. And we are having a healthcare discussion, so some members of this panel, I would say. And the question is very clear. Where are the buffers within this entire capital that we're providing? We have the ability to provide long-term capital, very long-term capital, but that is just partly the problem. The other part is, where is the equity? Where are the enhancements? Where are the guarantees? If we can bifurcate everything to make sure that, when a patient walks in, and they don't have to pay out of pocket, the insurance is there, all of that would enhance the release of capital for the rest necessary project. And it doesn't have to be in the building of hospitals and the like. Diagnostic centers, the entire ecosystem of the hospital healthcare value chain. It comes down to understanding the risk and being able to mitigate the risk that may have given or would give concerns to capital providers. And once that is done, you will find a blended financing, a long-term financing come to the table. I'll close by saying that when you want to look at healthcare financing, and this is a point I would like to leave you with, when you look at bank financing, I think it's suitable for, the working capital nature of the consumable cycles and all of that within the hospital. But when you're using bank financing to actually construct, and we know that the banks will require quarterly repayment, semi-annual repayment of capital, then it creates a burden in an environment where the per capita income of Nigerians that this healthcare is provided to is very low. So you have to then look at the optimal capital structure, which is where we kind of play in, to say we can provide a long-term capital and every other party kind of plays on along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lubenjo. I think your comments actually set the stage for me to move on to Mr. Shoibo. In terms of Mr. Lubenjo has identified the interests of the investors or the fund providers. Mr. Shoibo, how can we align these interests? What are the top considerations to bear in mind in aligning the interest of the fund providers and the players within the healthcare sector? Mr. Shoibo.
Yeah, okay, I mean, fantastic question, right? And I see that the idea around alignment of interest is very critical, because we're going to have to see that there will be a lot of, in achieving what we want to achieve, there's going to be a lot of private capital that will flow into bridging the infrastructure gap. So both sponsors as well as the investors need to play as a team and ultimately dovetail into how we fill this infrastructure gap. And it's critical to look at the objective of alignment of interest. And the way I see it is that the investors and the sponsors want a situation whereby those who are tasked with managing the business get the right investment to manage that business, while those who put down money for the business to work also get their due return or their projected returns on that particular business. Now, for the sponsors, the challenge is the fact that they wear a dual hat. They manage the business as well as they also are investors within that business. So there's always this pressure on sponsors to demonstrate that they are not incentivized, to the detriment of the investors, right? But at the same time, they're also investors in the business because they put in so much effort, sweat equity, and they also want to get some returns around it. And at the same time, it makes the sponsors also ask the questions from the investors that they hope that they are not getting liquidity events, exits that are not at their own detriment, such that when the investors leave the business, they are in a sustainable situation that allows them to be able to continue the business from where the funding came from, or that the objectives of the funding can be sustained after the investors are gone. So on the part of investors, particularly financial investors, the challenge is that they are under a lot of pressure to return money to their own investors, because they also have investors that give them money to like uninvest within a particular space. Now, for the sponsors is that, like I said, they want to ensure that by the time these guys are gone, the investors are gone, they want to ensure that they can also continue to manage the investment on a sustainable basis. So when I look at the sponsors, or what they should need to achieve first is to realize that the moment you open up your business to an investor, that business has to have a mindset shift from the fact that it can no longer be an owner-manager mindset. You have new guys on the table who want to have a say on the table. They want rights to veto some particular decision because they're also protecting their own interests as well as the interests of their investors. So that builds upon the sponsors to put in some processes in place that ensure governance, right? Transparency, accountability, and financial management. Otherwise, you get pressure from your investors who will now be demanding higher transparency requirements, and they'll be critical around the expenses. Now, it's also important that at this stage is for the investors to ensure that the business plan is being implemented, because ultimately the business plan would also work towards both stakeholders within that business, so that you can give returns. If the business can become profitable, you can give returns to your investors that will count towards the exit, as well as also have some incentive to yourself, because you're not only being incentivized as a manager, but at this time, once dividends are being paid, you get incentivized. So those are things that they have to look at in structuring the investment with the investor in such a way that they can also get some liquidity events on the part of the sponsors and the investors while the business is being run. Now, for the investors, we've said quite a bit on this webinar in terms of the fact that we need longer term money, patient capital within the Nigerian or the African health sector's space. And that's because the health sector straddles between a commercial venture as well as an impact business. So we need to start thinking about how we can do this. So I think we need more permanent capital vehicles so that you can create exit and liquidity investors for earlier investors. They can exit into the same fund. The same fund can find a way of buying out the interest in such investments and give the investment some longer time to be able to create value which can be extracted. In addition, is that when you exit, if it's an equity investment, you need to think around having a pipeline of other investors who will be interested in a later stage of the business, so that by the time you're ready to go, it's easy to sell your interest to that investment. The company keeps on going well, and those people will be able to take advantage of the value that has been created over a period of time, right? So things like this would put less pressure on sponsors, put less pressure on the investment, and it can come up to be a win-win situation. So it's to look at the entire system as a whole, in the fact that it's healthcare, it's commercial, it's impact, right? But let's look for a win-win situation whereby you can offload your investment to other people. You can create more permanent capital vehicles that can take up those investments and can allow the gestation period to be much longer than it currently is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Shoibo. Just quickly, Mr. Shoibo, in 2 minutes, if possible, I anticipate that there will be regulatory pitfalls, particularly in a situation where you have funding deals in Nigeria between the funder and the player or sponsor in Nigeria. Well, what are these anticipated legal or regulatory challenges? I also anticipate that there might be competition issues as well. Can you just provide us within 2 minutes what you anticipate as things for issues that the investor or the funder should consider at the point of providing the funds, as well as legal issues that the player or the industry person or the healthcare player should consider at the point of receiving funds? I'm sure you've addressed some of them, but I think you should just speak to the regulatory parts of it.
Okay, on the regulatory side, I think for the sponsors, it's important to ensure that they have the requisite licenses when those investments are being made. So if you have like an HMO, that means you have to be registered with the NHIS. Then in terms of hospitals, ensuring that the doctors have the requisite registrations and the nurses have the requisite registrations. There are things around HEFAMA in Lagos and similar agencies within other states. If it's an equity investment, there's a major issue that has come up in recent time around competition, which makes people require the FCCPC approval, right? If it's not a small merger, that is having below 500 million in terms of the annual turnover of the business or the combined with the acquirer, right? You have to get the approval. But, right, if they are related entities, if you're doing a restructuring, there is a window that allows you to get a negative clearance that would not require you to get the full approval of the commission. The other hurdle around this is around the fees. The fees, we've come to realize, are quite huge, right? It's always a percentage of either the consideration or of the combined turnover of the entities involved in the investment, or it could also come up as an M&A transaction. So the fees could be high. If it's an HMO, there is another level of approvals that you need to obtain. It's a no objection from the NHIS. And that actually has to be obtained on time because there are about 8 milestones to be able to achieve that. But generally, once the licenses are in place, right, particularly for the professionals, from the doctors, for the facility, in the case of HMO, NHIS registrations are required. The usual next order is around, if it's an equity investment, around competition, which I've explained. But if it's debt, if it's an HMO, there's also a requirement to get the prior consent of the NHIS before you can take on a debt. So those are some regulatory, hurdles to watch out for within that space. But I think the licensing issues are very critical because they also impact on some kind of patient liability that could arise.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shoyebo. That covered a lot of issues. I'm going to jump back to Mr. Olugbenjo and try to get some more of your experience from the fund side. And it's to the question that, in view of the huge infrastructure gap, what is required to attract more institutional funding to bridge the healthcare infrastructure gap? Mr. Olugbenjo. Then I'm also going to seek Dr. Ajayi's contribution on this question in terms of institutional funding and what your ideas are. But Mr. Olugbenjo, please, please.
Okay, thank you. I think some of the, to unlock institutional funding, I think projects needs to be well prepared. There's a lot of project preparation that needs effort that needs to go in
Sorry. Sorry, Mr. Olubenjo, we can't seem to hear you. Mr. Olubenjo, still there? I think whilst we wait for Mr. Olubenjo, Dr. Ajayi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chelsea.
Yes,
yeah, I mean, I think as Mr. Olubenjo said, and I would echo what he said, the problem is not really access. I think there is a lot of institutional funding looking for healthcare opportunities. The issue really is, how do you design your healthcare project and ensure that it is financially sustainable and able to make the required returns? And that's really where the challenge comes. Because the real thesis of my presentation today is just to put that point on the table, that healthcare is important, but and I know that we all feel the pain and the gaps in the healthcare infrastructure in Nigeria, but we have to be smart about how we invest in solving this problem. So, going back to, proper, business project finance 101, just making sure that we're clear with our feasibility, we're clear with our capabilities, we're clear with our market, we're clear with our value proposition, we're clear with our projections, and make sure we finance appropriately to the return expectation of the business. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And so we're actually a bit, short on time right now. So we're going to move on the fast lane now. Dr. Ajayi, this next question requires your experience in terms of patient capital. You had mentioned that in your presentation. Can you, in 2 to 3 minutes, tell us how, you've of course already proposed that mixed blend in investment and financing model for the healthcare sector, but particularly for that solopreneur, particularly for these small scale players in the healthcare sector, would you also propose this mixed blend of financing, or is there a different investment or financing model that may be structured for small scale players in the industry?
Well, I think the small scale players are in the industry and they want to make a living. And so we need to look for products that suit their level of performance. But I have a bigger issue, and I think the whole of the industry needs to be organized in a way that makes it investable. I mean, there's a question in there about barriers to entry. I think my point about barriers to entry is that as it currently lies, it's an all-comers game, and we're letting market forces just drive participation. We can't do that in healthcare. Healthcare is one of the industries that has been shown that you need regulation, and the regulatory structure is not there to increase barriers to entry, but to define the criteria for participation. So what is a primary care provider? If that's the license you want, then get a license for primary care. Don't admit patients. If you want to admit patients, what level of admissions can you do? We need a license for that. Then there's also the concept of certificate of need. I mean, do we need all these hospitals in Victoria Island? How many hospitals do you need in one area? So, and I think if we're able to get all that system in place, then financing, I think, becomes easier, because then you are protecting the investment to a certain extent. One of the things I know, especially with the pharmacists, is that you can't put a pharmacy within 200, I think, meters of another pharmacy, so you don't crowd the space. We don't have that in healthcare. If you're a quality player and you've invested heavily to make sure that you are providing services at a certain level, the next guy may just open next door to you and position themselves that I'm cheaper than you. And that puts a challenge on your investment. And so that's where regulation comes in, because then there needs to be a level of protection. In a city like London, you'll be surprised to know that there are very few private providers with a license to provide maternity services, because the requirements for safe maternity services is such that only NHS hospitals can afford this. So you have hospitals like St. Mary's, where the royals have all delivered their babies. It's a teaching hospital, but there's a private wing. And these are the kind of organization that we need. Then once we are able to do that, investments will make sense, because then it's not just market forces, but the investments are provided. There's going to be enough volume and footfall going into that facility to ensure that it pays back. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi. Mr. Olugbenjo is back, and please, Mr. Olugbenjo, in two minutes, let's have your comments on the previous question and on this one, please.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
All right. So in 2 minutes, I'll take less than. I think to get the institutional capital, projects needs to be really well prepared. And that was the message that I wanted to pass. It's not a straight to financing. It has to be very well prepared in order to get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would want to jump into the Q&A now. I see a lot of activity there. And so I'm going to pick, we can't really cover all the questions, but I'm going to pick some of the questions and treat it as much as possible. The first one is, I'm going to need Mr. Gordon's assistance here. He says, how do we juxtapose the fact that our regulator, NHIS, in the healthcare sector is also a player, which I feel is the bane of Nigerian private healthcare providers? Kieran, please, 2 minutes to respond, please. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm actually smiling because I mean, it is such a difficult thing. It's not just a problem. It's a major problem for the HMOs, and I know that there are some providers that really struggle with them. There is legislation or regulation that's actually currently sort of on the go to split the NHIS into two, where there will be a kind of governing body that deals with regulation, and then the NHIS itself will actually become only the operator of the National Health Insurance Scheme. So I think that will help to some extent. I think the reality is that the government has a huge role to play in the provision of universal health coverage, purely because of indigent population or population that simply don't have the cash to pay for services. So we can't remove the public sector from the market completely, because they'll always have a role to play. I think that what we have to do though is together we have to, and that's not just in our industry, but outside of our industry, even challenge the NHIS, because where we've got to now is that we have tariff sets that are unsustainable for healthcare providers and premium sets that are unsustainable for the health insurers. So everybody is kind of stuck at a point where it's actually not sustainable for them to carry on participating in the National Health Insurance Scheme. And that's a very difficult place to be. And there's a lot of pressure being put on NHIS. And I think that with the new executive secretary, we're really hoping that both of those things can be unlocked and the whole scheme becomes more sustainable again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. I'm going to jump on to to a question that we would need Dr. Ajayi to answer from Peter Dateme. Peter said, I'm a healthcare architect, and I'm wondering how PPP can work in Nigeria, considering our uncertain political environment and I would say alleged corruption.
Well, I mean, it's all about governance and systems. I shared earlier that we have 14 PPPs working in LASUT. As I speak, we're negotiating with a big group called MNT from Turkey to provide oncology services. And this will be purely, a PPP financing project. So I think where there is the will, there's a way. That's how I run. I think we just need to focus on the objectives. PPPs are critical for driving convergence between the private sector and the public sector. We know the government can't afford to provide healthcare infrastructure. And if we're going to get the right kind of quality, that onus is on the private sector. So I believe that there's going to be a lot more PPP activities in the healthcare space, providing services in public hospitals as we go along. And it's going to be a big growth area. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi. I'm going to jump back to Dr. Sule for the next question from Dr. Odulano, Debo Odulano. And his question is that should HMOs be the only providers of health insurance in Nigeria, considering the low penetration over the last 15, 20 years? Shouldn't we be considering other approaches to achieving financial risk protection for users of healthcare in Nigeria? Dr. Sule, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Debo, for that question. So I think it's a question that is based on regulation. So based on the current regulation, I will say the regulation only allows for entities referred to as health maintenance organizations to carry risk, especially risk associated with healthcare products. However, life insurance players as well, who have licenses from NICOM, can also offer healthcare risk products as well. The NHIS also makes room for associations of individuals to come together under the auspices of what is known as the Mutual Health Association to form some sort of, to share risk among themselves. So the current landscape does not restrict others from offering health insurance products. Life insurance companies are allowed to participate, mutual health associations as well, which must be licensed by the NHIS, are also allowed to participate. I would also say that hospital groups also can partner with health insurance companies to offer innovative products. I think the challenge with that is that there are very few national healthcare entities in Nigeria. What I mean by that is that I'm not aware, other than the two major pharmacy chains, of any hospital or clinic that has operations outside more than 1 or 2 states. So that itself is a challenge to be able to offer products directly to the community. But anything we do has to be regulated appropriately. But I do think challenge is not with restrictions on the regulatory side. I think it's challenge with respect to product development, to distribution, like I had discussed, and also financing. So if we can crack all those 3 elements, I think we can increase health insurance penetration. Over to you, Toyosi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sule. I think we've covered as much questions we can for this session. And at this time, I'm going to invite our panelists and of course, our distinguished keynote speaker for their final comments on the theme. At this time, I invite Dr. Richardson Ajayi for his final comments to close up on the webinar. Dr. Ajayi.
Thank you very much. I think my final comments will really summarize my take-home messages, which is really that there is a big problem that we have to solve, but we need to be innovative in looking at financing solutions. Blended finance, because there is a very long lead time to profitability with healthcare projects. And so we need to be sure that we can mitigate that risk and not try and use short-term funds to solve a long-term problem. So blended finance, more focus on development or impact funding in the early part of the project. And then as you scale up, then perhaps look more into more commercial funding alternatives. And then I also think we need to also reimagine healthcare. The healthcare, the gaps that we have are defined by what we currently do. The whole space is changing with the adoption of technology, and with the right approach, with a focus on wellness, looking at outpatient clinics and fewer hospitals in inverted commas, I think we may be able to solve the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ajayi. I'm going to move on to Mr. Chairman Gordon. Final comments.
Yeah, tricky to add any comments on what's been a very interesting discussion. I think there's no doubt that there's the myriad of challenges and there's a range of different ways to solve it. I think this webinar is a good start because we're starting to have a proper, more formalized discussion. I think the example of Evercare is really something that needs to be followed. It's start where you are and just do something. I think while the challenge is huge and there's a significant amount of money invested, you can only eat that elephant one bite at a time. And thinking we now need to somehow find $100 billion it just becomes so daunting. We do it in smaller bites. I think it'll be easier to achieve.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. I would want to call on Mr. Shoyibo, Adekunle Shoyibo. Please, your closing comments, please.
Yes, so my closing comments will be around, sustainability of the entire healthcare ecosystem, particularly as it relates to sponsors and investors, right? So for the sponsors, I'll advise them to always look at the fine lines, get a lawyer to advise you in relation to whatever investment arrangement you have with the investors, because there needs to be a meeting of minds at the point when you are making that investment. We have great sponsors here in Nigeria, and we have great investors. Once there's a meeting of minds, you understand what exactly both parties are trying to achieve. I think they can always go the long haul. And for the investors, I'll say, looking at healthcare, like Dr. Ajayi said, we need to do a different look. We need to rethink and do a different look. We may need more products that are more long-term, right? We may need a combination of debt and equity. We need to look at the stages of the investment, right? Just so that it can help us to, extract value, create value, and be able to extract value in good time so that sponsors don't feel cheated in the investments that are finally made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shoyibo. I would jump back to Dr. Sule for final comments. Dr. Sule.
Thank you. So lastly, maybe just to mention that you can't, the essence of infrastructure in healthcare is essentially to drive universal health coverage. You cannot have universal health coverage if people don't have the access to the right financial risk protection instruments in the form of maybe contributory or tax-based systems. We expect that government will continue to support the vulnerable, but for the vast majority who are not vulnerable, we'll expect that the industry, the healthcare financing industry, has to reimagine what the product is essentially, and what the offering is, and how it should be delivered. We have seen perhaps a parallel in the banking industry. Financial inclusion has grown from 5 or 10% to 50% by the last assessment released by FINA. And that has been on the back of, reimagining what banking is. I know the purists will shudder at the fact that I cannot do banking outside my doorsteps with POS operators. But the truth of the matter is that perhaps the expansion was not for people like me who already had alternative channels, or it was more for those who were unbanked. And so we have to do the same thing in healthcare as well, reimagine what the product is, be flexible, and that flexibility also will be required from the regulator and from the operators, not just the health insurance companies, but the providers as well. Like Dr. Ajayi rightfully said, per capita income and per capita health spend is very, very low here. It's around about $80, perhaps even before the last devaluation. And so we cannot continue to offer solutions that were derived in markets where the spend is around $10,000 to Nigerians. We have to reimagine what the product is. We have to leverage technology for distribution. We have to leverage technology for provision of care as well. We have to leverage alternative channels to deliver primary health care and move away from hospitals, essentially. And we also have to be more effective or efficient as HMOs and as providers. And the only way to do that is to use technology to accomplish that. Thank you for having me. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Sule. And I'm going to move back to the money man. And in your closing comments, I would want to say that, do you anticipate in the nearest future Stanbic IBTC is going to set up a healthcare dedicated fund? If you can address that in your closing comments, Mr. Olubenjo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me now, because it seems
yes, it's perfect.
Okay, good. I think my parting comments would be that, as has been said, the need for more convergence and the need for collaboration. On our part as Stanbic IBTC Infrastructure Fund, we are ready to support healthcare investments, but that is not the full solution. That's a part of it. I said earlier that projects need to be well prepared. All the value chain ecosystem stakeholders need to come together. And I think one bite at a time, we will get there. But we have started in that line. And yes, healthcare is a core mandate for us as a fund. And to your last point is, yes, there should be a proliferation of specialist fund. It starts by us showing and proving to investors that this concept works. And once the investors latch onto it, there will be specialization, there will be a proliferation of funds, and which is where I believe we're all headed to. But it starts by having all the stakeholders come to the table, including the regulators. And I hope some of the nuggets from this session will be made available to the regulators as well, that these are the progressive views from practitioners within the sector and as to how to unlock long-term value within the entire ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Olubenjo. Mrs. Temia Ogboro, unfortunately, had to attend to an emergency and had to be excused. But nevertheless, she sends best regards and again, thanks the other panelists. At this point, and before I invite our head of the health and pharma sector in Jackson and Edu, that's Mrs. Okorocha, I just want to answer a question as to sharing of the webinar video, and just to assure the attendees that we will discuss with the panelists and obtain their consent towards sharing the video of this session and come back to them. Mrs. Okorocha, at this point, grateful to have your closing remarks to close off, and vote of thanks, of course, to close off on this session. Mrs. Okorocha.
Thank you so much, Toyosi. Ladies and gentlemen, to say that this has been a highly interesting discussion will be to say the least. My notebook It's full of notes. I've just been writing frantically, trying to, kind of, let it all sink in. It is a problem. It is a conundrum. It has so many angles and so many facets to it. But I think that you will agree with me that our panelists and our keynote speaker have done justice to this topic. And for that, I would like everybody here to give them a virtual round of applause, if you may. If you can, a virtual round of applause in the chat box would be very welcome. I'm so delighted with the tone of the discussions, the breadth of knowledge that has been shared by each and every one of the panelists today. To just round up by sharing some of the comments, very briefly, Dr. Ajayi's conclusion is really that we can't use short-term funds to solve long-term problems, and that one struck me, really, really hard. We have to be innovative, looking at a solution, and we have to mitigate the risk. And the fact that there's re-emerging healthcare and the space is changing with the adoption of tech, and that is the truth. We can't use old-term solutions to solve today's problems in healthcare. Kieran says the mixed challenges, but the discussions, these formal discussions are a really good start, and we have to start where we are. Dr. Sule continues to say that we must leverage technology to deliver healthcare. We have to be flexible, and the regulatory landscape needs to be taken into consideration. Dr. Ajayi also harped on this. And of course, our money man has let us know that there has to be a return on investment. You understand, if you want people to invest their money, then you have to be prepared. It's not about looking for the finance. He feels that there are enough health funds that can be tapped into, but the projects have to be bankable. They need to be prepared. They need to look at a fuller picture, and that is one bite at a time. And indeed, to end with the comments of my colleague and partner, Kunle, Kunle says that there needs to be sustainability, and that we need to ensure that when you're going into such projects, you have to hire a lawyer to explain the little print, to ensure that you look at it from all angles and before you go into any such project or collaboration. And I will end with the fact that there needs to be a synergy. There needs to be a convergence of all these ideas and all key stakeholders in the entire healthcare value chain before a solution can be found. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your morning with us. We're deep into the afternoon now. Dr. Ajayi, thank you so much for that exceptional opening keynote address. Many people are asking for the presentation. It was really, really exceptional. My thanks also go out to all the speakers here today. I am delighted that you agreed to join this distinguished panel, and your comments have been spot on. To the organizers, of which I am one, Toyosi, thank you for doing an excellent job creating the discussions and moderating the sessions. I must mention that we do intend to collate all the suggestions, the discussion points, and the solutions that we have indeed been able to articulate here today. We're going to collate it into, say, a communique that we will be submitting to the relevant authorities to even start the discussion and see where change can occur. So on behalf of all of us at Jackson Edu, I thank you for your time and do have a pleasant day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.